The hum of engines beneath the belly of Flight 303 vibrated faintly through the floor of the departure gate. A night flight from Istanbul to New York, routine, almost dull, but the kind of dullness that people found comforting. Business travelers typed on laptops, families huddled around tablets, and lone wanderers stared at departure screens, counting hours and miles ahead. No one among them had the faintest idea that Flight 303 would never arrive. 1. The captain. Captain Adrian Holt was a man who trusted checklists more than people. 22 years of commercial flying had taught him that skies were predictable, people were not. As he walked through the jet bridge toward the aircraft, a sense of déjà vu clung to him like static. He paused by the cockpit door and glanced out the window at the runway lights. Their glow diffused in the light drizzle. "You okay, Captain?" First Officer Lena Price asked, adjusting her headset as she powered up the avionics. "Yeah," Holt replied, though his gaze lingered outside. "Feels like I've flown this exact night before." Price chuckled. "That's called routine. It's a good thing." Holt smiled faintly but couldn't shake the odd prickle at the base of his skull, as if time itself was looping around him. Clara Nguyen, 68, shuffled down the aisle with trembling hands and a photograph tucked into her purse. It was of her husband, who'd died 6 months ago. This was supposed to be their trip, their dream retirement voyage to visit the city they'd always promised each other. Now, she traveled alone. Seat 14A by the window. She settled in, fastening her seatbelt with slow, arthritic fingers. Outside, raindrops smeared the glass, and the night beyond seemed unusually dark, like a heavy curtain had been drawn across the sky. "First time flying alone?" asked a soft voice beside her. It was Luca, a 10-year-old boy traveling with his father 2 rows behind. He'd swapped seats to sit by the window. Clara smiled. "First time without someone." The boy nodded, with the quiet wisdom only children and ghosts possess. In seat 7C, Dr. Elias Cade typed furiously on his laptop. A physicist known for his work on temporal anomalies, he was on his way to a conference in New York to present findings on something most of his colleagues dismissed as fantasy: time folds, natural rifts in the space-time continuum caused by atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions. He glanced up as the cabin lights flickered briefly, too brief for anyone else to notice. "Odd," he murmured. The flicker happened again, this time accompanied by a faint static buzz that seemed to vibrate through his teeth. He glanced around. Nobody else reacted. Just the plane breathing. Just the engines warming up. Just coincidence. Marina Valles had worked long-haul flights for nearly a decade, and she could read passengers like open books. Tonight, the air in the cabin felt off. Heavier. Like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. As she secured the galley, a whisper brushed her ear. "Turn back." She spun around. No one was there. Marina's pulse jumped. She shook it off. Exhaustion, probably. It was a double shift, and she hadn't slept properly in 2 days. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." The intercom crackled. She pasted on her smile and walked the aisle, but she couldn't shake the icy sensation that something unseen was watching from the overhead compartments. The wheels lifted from the wet tarmac at 22:47 local time. Passengers clapped softly as Istanbul's lights fell away beneath them, swallowed by the clouded night. Holt and Price guided the aircraft into its cruising ascent, and within minutes Flight 303 pierced through the upper layers of turbulence into the calm night sky. But the calm didn't last. At 23:03, Dr. Cade's laptop clock froze. The seconds stopped ticking. He tapped the keyboard. Nothing. Then, with a sharp blink, it jumped 2 minutes forward. Elsewhere, Clara noticed condensation forming on the inside of her window, a fine mist, like breath. And in the galley, Marina walked past row 18 and saw someone standing there. A tall man in an outdated pilot uniform from another era. Cap tilted, eyes hollow. She blinked, and he was gone. "Flight 303, maintain heading 320, came the air traffic controller's voice. "Acknowledged," Holt replied. But as he checked the instruments, a frown formed. The digital heading remained steady, but the magnetic compass needle spun wildly, as though possessed. "Lena, confirm with ground radar," he said. "Already did. They say we're right on course." But the stars outside didn't match the charts. Orion was gone. The moon gone. Only a field of unfamiliar constellations stared back. older and colder than any he'd ever seen. It started small. A woman in seat 22D screamed when the seat beside her, empty since boarding, breathed. She swore she felt a hand brush against hers. A businessman's smartwatch skipped backward by 3 hours. Cabin lights dimmed and brightened in slow pulses, syncing with the plane's heartbeat. Dr. Cade stood, eyes wide. "Captain," he called out, pushing past a flight attendant. "You need to listen to me. We're not flying through normal airspace." Holt met him at the cockpit door. "Explain." Cade's voice trembled. "There are conditions, rare, almost impossible, where electromagnetic interference and atmospheric ionization align. They create temporal shear points. If we pass through one, you're saying we're in a time warp? I'm saying we might not be in our time anymore." At 23:27, the plane vanished from radar. Istanbul control called. No response. Satellite tracking lost it. The flight path, the transponder signal, even the black box beacon, gone. But inside the cabin, no one knew they were already considered missing. Instead, they watched in horror as the world outside the windows began to change. Below, faint coastlines formed where oceans shouldn't be. A river of pale green light snaked through a continent unknown to any map. And somewhere in the darkness below, faint orange lights burned, a city that should not exist. Clara clutched her husband's photo. "He told me he'd wait for me," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. I think he's here." The boy beside her turned, eyes now pale as moonlight. "He is." Row by row, they appeared, transparent figures occupying empty seats. A man reading a newspaper from 1958. A young woman cradling a baby wrapped in linen. An old pilot in a uniform from the 1940s, tipping his cap. All silent. All watching. Marina backed away, crossing herself. "Mother of God. They're not ghosts," Cade muttered, his voice breaking. "They're echoes. People from other flights, other times, that never made it home." The plane's engines roared louder, though the throttle hadn't changed. Panels flickered. Screens flashed coordinates that didn't exist. Holt gripped the controls. "Can we turn back?" Price asked, her voice shaking. No, his voice was grim. "There's no back to go to." At midnight, the in-flight entertainment system, long switched off, came alive. A single sentence scrolled across every screen in eerie white letters. "You are not the first." And then, silence. Passengers sobbed. Some prayed. Others stared out into the timeless abyss beyond the glass. The plane was still flying, but toward what? No one knew. Only Clara seemed calm. "We were always meant to end here," she whispered to the boy, who was no longer breathing, yet still sat upright. And deep within the cockpit, a warning light blinked red, not for fuel, not for altitude, but for time synchronization error. The cabin was wrapped in a kind of silence that didn't feel natural. It was too heavy, too deliberate. The passengers of Flight 303 were no longer merely travelers. They were witnesses to something ancient and unknowable. Somewhere beyond the windows, time itself seemed to stretch and coil like smoke, and with every passing minute, the line between the living and the dead blurred further. Captain Adrian Holt stared at the blinking, time sync error light, feeling the weight of the impossible crush his chest. "This isn't a malfunction," Dr. Cade insisted from behind the cockpit door. "That's a temporal desynchronization warning. We're out of alignment with our own timeline." "English, doctor," Lena said sharply. Her hands trembled slightly over the controls. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," Cade swallowed, "we're not where we were. And we're not when we were." Holt exhaled slowly, fighting the rising panic. "We still have fuel, thrust, navigation control. If we can climb or descend." "No," Cade interrupted. "You don't understand. Altitude doesn't matter. Course doesn't matter. Once you're inside a time fold, you're trapped. The laws of space and time don't obey our logic here." The cockpit was silent except for the hum of instruments and the distant murmur of terrified passengers behind the door. Holt finally spoke, voice low. "Then we do the only thing left." "What's that?" Lena asked. "Keep flying." Clara Nguyen sat perfectly still in seat 14A, the photo of her husband clutched tightly in her lap. The boy beside her, Luca, was no longer breathing, yet his lips moved as if whispering prayers from a forgotten language. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. "To guide you." Luca's voice echoed, though his lips barely parted. "To guide all of you." Clara blinked back tears. Am I dying? You already are, he said, his tone matter of fact, like he was explaining a simple truth. Everyone on this plane is. The cabin light flickered again, and for the briefest moment, Clara saw the seat across from her filled by a familiar figure. Her husband, David, smiling gently, wearing the same blue shirt he'd been buried in. It's not your time, he whispered. Clara's heart twisted painfully. Then why am I here? Because time has no meaning here. Here, it's always your time, and never. At 014, the plane jolted violently. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Screams filled the cabin as overhead compartments burst open and luggage tumbled down. But the altimeter remained unchanged. Airspeed stable. Engine thrust normal. This isn't turbulence, Lena hissed, gripping her harness. It's a ripple, Cade said from behind them. We're passing through another boundary. Each one pulls us deeper. Deeper into what? Holt snapped. History, Cade said, almost reverently. The sky remembers everything that's ever happened here. Every flight, every storm, every crash. And we're flying through those memories. Outside, the darkness shifted. Shapes moved within the clouds, not aircraft, but shadows of aircraft, flickering in and out of existence. Biplanes from World War I. A passenger liner from the 1950s. A Soviet bomber from the Cold War. Dozens, hundreds, phantoms of aviation's past, all trapped in the same endless corridor of time. Marina Valles had stopped trying to explain what she was seeing. In the galley mirror, her reflection was younger, 5 years younger, wearing a different uniform, smiling in a way she hadn't since the day her husband died. And then, the reflection spoke. Remember the promise? She stumbled back, knocking over a tray. No, this isn't real. Remember, the reflection insisted. The flight, the storm, the crash. Marina froze, the crash. Tears welled in her eyes as buried memories clawed their way back to the surface. A night flight, a lightning strike, a cabin full of terrified passengers, and the final, terrible realization. She'd died in that crash 5 years ago. No, she whispered. I survived. But when she touched her wrist, the pulse she expected wasn't there. Dr. Elias Cade sat hunched over his laptop, now nothing more than a dark mirror reflecting his haunted face. Every theory he'd ever published, every lecture he'd ever given, they were all meaningless now. They weren't flying through a time fold. They were part of it. This isn't a flight, he said aloud, standing in the aisle. It's a collection. Passengers turned toward him, eyes hollow with fear. What do you mean? One man asked. Everything that's ever been lost in the sky, every vanished flight, every unexplained disappearance, they're all here, layered over one another. Stuck. And we're the latest edition. So we're dead. Another voice trembled. Not yet, Kate said. But soon. At 032, the radio crackled, a garbled voice breaking through static. Mayday? Mayday. This is Pan AM 914, we're. The transmission cut out. Lena's blood ran cold. Pan AM 914 vanished in 1955. Another voice followed, this one clearer, trembling with panic. This is Flight 19, our compasses are gone, fuel's low, we can't. More static. Flight 19, the infamous squadron lost over the Bermuda Triangle in 1945. One by one, voices from decades past filled the cockpit, all trapped in the same endless loop. Some crying for help, some praying, some screaming. And beneath it all, a single repeated whisper, layered from hundreds of different voices. We never land. By 1 o'clock, the boundaries between reality and memory had dissolved completely. Passengers walked the aisles only to find themselves stepping into different decades, the upholstery changing color, flight attendants wearing vintage uniforms, the in-flight announcements switching languages and accents. In one section, the cabin looked brand new, gleaming with 1970s decor. In another, it was old and rusted, wires dangling from the ceiling. And in some parts, it wasn't a plane at all. It was an open sky, stars spinning beneath their feet. Clara walked down the aisle and saw her husband standing by the exit door. You could come with me, he said gently. It's easier that way. Is this heaven? She asked. It's not heaven, he replied. It's everything that's ever been lost. Captain Holt stared at the empty horizon ahead. His instruments no longer displayed altitude or heading. Only a single word blinking in red across every screen. Surrender. What does it mean? Lena whispered. It means we stop fighting, Holt said. We let the sky decide. Lena turned to him, horrified. You're suggesting we give up? Do you see another way? His voice was steady, calm in the face of the unthinkable. We've been trying to steer through something that can't be navigated. Maybe surrender is the only way to end it. Cade burst into the cockpit. He's right. Lena stared at them both. And if surrender means death? Cade's voice was a whisper. Then death was always our destination. At 1:13, Captain Holt disengaged autopilot and powered down the engines. The aircraft shuddered as it began a slow, deliberate descent into the unknown. The cabin grew eerily quiet. The ghosts, or echoes, no longer sat silently. They stood, facing forward, as if waiting for something. Through the cockpit glass, a strange glow appeared below, a golden horizon that wasn't land, wasn't ocean, wasn't anything human eyes were meant to see. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Marina stood in the aisle, tears streaming down her face. It's beautiful. Clara held Luca's hand. I'm not afraid anymore. And as the plane continued downward, time slowed. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes into hours. Passengers felt their memories unravel. Childhood birthdays, first loves, tragedies, all slipping away like sand through fingers. They weren't falling. They were arriving. The glow beneath the plane grew brighter with every passing second, a strange, golden radiance that didn't seem to come from the earth, sun, or stars. It pulsed like a living thing, drawing them in, wrapping the aircraft in its shimmering gravity. For the passengers of Flight 303, fear had shifted into something else. Some called it peace. Others called it resignation. But deep down, they all knew. They had crossed a threshold that could never be undone. The cockpit was silent except for the faint hum of instruments, many now displaying nonsensical data, altitude reading negative, heading spinning in endless circles, external temperature showing numbers that didn't exist. Captain Adrian Holt's hands rested lightly on the controls, though he no longer guided the aircraft. It was moving on its own, drawn by the golden current beneath them. Do you regret it? Lena asked quietly. Fly. He gave a faint, broken smile. Never. No surrendering. Holt's eyes stayed on the horizon. Every pilot is trained to fight for control. But this isn't flight. This is fate. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a photograph, his wife and daughter at the beach, taken years ago. They were both gone now, lost in a car accident while he was halfway across the world in a cockpit, chasing clouds instead of being there. He had never forgiven himself. Maybe this is where I'm meant to land, he whispered. The golden light bled through the windows now, bathing the cabin in soft, warm hues. Clara stared into it, heart aching with something deeper than fear. Across the aisle, David, her husband, stood waiting, his hand extended. It's time, he said gently. I don't want to leave yet, Clara whispered. There's still so much I haven't done. There's nothing left to do. This isn't about what's ahead. It's about letting go. Luca, the ghost boy, turned toward her, eyes glimmering like starlight. He's right. The longer you hold on, the harder it becomes. Clara closed her eyes. For the first time since his death, she felt peace. She rose from her seat and reached for David's hand, and when their fingers touched, her physical body slumped lifelessly back into 14A. Passengers gasped, but she didn't hear them. She was already walking down a corridor of light, her husband's hand guiding her home. In the rear galley, flight attendant Marina Valles stared into the reflective oven door, her younger reflection staring back, the one from before the crash. The reflection smiled sadly. You were never supposed to leave that night, it whispered. I thought I survived, Marina breathed. You didn't. You died on impact. You've been trapped between worlds ever since, serving flights that no longer exist. Tears streamed down Marina's cheeks. Then why am I here now? Because it's over. This is the last flight. The word struck her like a blow. She turned and walked down the aisle, pausing beside a sleeping passenger. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw herself lying there, pale, broken, the ghost of the woman she used to be. And for the first time since that stormy night 5 years ago, she didn't feel guilty. She felt free. Dr. Elias Cade sat by the emergency exit, staring into the golden light beyond. It wasn't space. It wasn't atmosphere. It was time itself, infinite and alive. His mind raced through equations and theories, none of them sufficient to explain what he was seeing. And for the first time in his career, he stopped trying to understand. "Are you afraid?" a voice asked. Cade turned. It was a man in an old leather flight jacket, his face weathered and familiar. Cade recognized him from an aviation textbook. Amelia Earhart's navigator, presumed lost in 1937. "No," Cade said after a moment. "Just humbled." The man nodded. "You're not the first to question. You won't be the last." "What is this place?" Cade asked. The man smiled faintly. "The sky keeps everything it touches. Every dream, every disaster, every ghost. And what happens to us?" "What always happens," the man said. "You become part of the story." At 1:37, reality itself began to unravel. Rows of seats twisted like ribbons. Passengers found themselves sitting beside versions of themselves. Older, younger, happier, broken. Some spoke. Some screamed. Others simply stared back with hollow eyes. The cabin stretched, folded, then stitched itself back together. For a moment, Flight 303 was not a plane but a collection of moments. Births, deaths, memories, futures, all layered on top of one another like pages of an infinite book. Through the cockpit window, Holt saw flashes of cities rising and falling in seconds. Civilizations blooming and crumbling. Empires forgotten before they began. And in the heart of the golden glow, a shape emerged that it was a city, vast and ethereal, suspended in the sky. Towers of light and shadow, roads that curved into infinity. It was not a place for the living. Altitude decreasing, Lena murmured, though the instruments showed nothing logical anymore. The plane was descending, but it wasn't falling toward Earth. It was descending through time itself, a controlled spiral into something older and deeper than reality. "Do you see that?" Holt whispered. At the center of the glowing city, a massive beacon pulsed, a tower of blinding light that seemed to call them closer. And wrapped around it were dozens of aircraft, frozen in orbit like moths circling a flame. Zeppelins from the 1930s, jetliners from the 70s, modern planes from just years ago. Their windows glowed faintly. Shadows moved inside. "They're still here," Lena breathed. "All of them." And then she saw the most horrifying thing of all. One of the planes had the same tail number as theirs. Flight 303. It was their plane, their exact aircraft. But it was decades older, rusted, skeletal, windows cracked, the logo of an airline long gone. It was as if they were watching their own future, AT-151. The radio flickered to life one last time. This time, the voice was clear, Adrian Holt's own voice. "This is Captain Adrian Holt of Flight 303. If anyone can hear me, we're not lost. We're kept. The sky remembers us." The transmission repeated, then dissolved into static. Lena stared at the speaker, trembling. "That was you." Holt's expression was unreadable. "No, that was us." The golden city loomed large now, filling every window. Passengers stood silently, watching their fate approach. Some prayed. Some held hands. Some closed their eyes and smiled, as if welcoming an old friend. "Engines off," Holt said quietly. Lena hesitated, then complied. The roar faded into silence. The plane was now gliding, not through air, but through memory. "Cabin crew," Holt whispered, "prepare for landing." But they all knew there would be no landing. The beacon pulsed faster. The city opened like a vast, glowing maw. And Flight 303, wings trembling, lights flickering, slipped beyond the final threshold. The point of no return. The light swallowed Flight 303 whole. For a few seconds, or maybe centuries, there was nothing but gold and silence. And then, as if the universe had exhaled, the world reshaped itself around them. They were still in the sky, still flying. But it was not the sky they knew. The passengers gasped as the clouds parted to reveal an impossible sight below, a vast city suspended among the clouds, its foundations anchored not to earth but to memory itself. Towering spires of light twisted into shapes that defied geometry. Bridges hung between structures that pulsed faintly like living things. Airships of every era floated serenely alongside aircraft that had disappeared decades, even centuries, ago. "This can't be real," Lena whispered from the cockpit. "It's like a city built from lost history." Dr. Cade stood behind her, eyes wide with awe. It's more than that. This is lost history. Every vessel, every flight, every life that vanished in the skies, they're all here. Preserved. Trapped. Marina pressed her hand against the window, her reflection merging with the city below. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's haunting. And as the plane descended slowly toward the glowing metropolis, a chilling thought crossed Captain Holt's mind. This wasn't their destination. This was their graveyard. As Flight 303 glided into a holding pattern around the city, they could see movement within the derelict aircraft drifting among the spires. Faces stared from the windows, faces pale and ancient, yet familiar. Some waved desperately. Others simply watched, hollow-eyed, as if they had been waiting centuries for someone new to join them. A voice crackled through the cockpit speakers, calm, almost soothing. "Welcome to Echelon." The word echoed through the cabin like a prayer. "You are safe. You are home. You are remembered." "Who is that?" Lena asked, scanning the comm panel. "No idea," Holt said. "We're not transmitting. They're broadcasting directly to us." Dr. Cade leaned closer to the radio. "Echelon," he murmured. "The final layer. The point where time converges." The plane finally leveled off and began a slow drift toward one of the floating platforms below, a docking station lined with hundreds of empty jetways. As they approached, Marina prepared the cabin, though she didn't know why. No one had told her to. It was instinct, a ritual. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly over the intercom, "we have arrived." The cabin doors opened with a hiss, and a strange stillness swept through the passengers. One by one, they stood and stepped forward, as if guided by invisible hands. Clara's body, lifeless since Part 2, was carried gently by unseen figures of light. Luca walked beside her, smiling faintly, his ghostly outline flickering with every step. The jetway didn't lead to an airport terminal. It led to a vast hall bathed in golden light. Murals of skies, storms, and flight adorned the walls. Names, thousands of names, were etched into the marble floor beneath their feet. Pan Am 914, Flight 19, Malaysia 370, Air France 447. And there, freshly carved into the stone, Flight 303. At the far end of the hall stood a man in a crisp uniform, though it wasn't from any airline they recognized. His features were indistinct, as if carved from fog, but his presence commanded silence. "Welcome, travelers," he said, voice resonant and kind. "I am the keeper." "Where are we?" Marina asked. "You are in the archive," the keeper replied, "where every flight that vanished, every soul the sky has claimed, is held forever." "Why us?" Holt asked. The keeper regarded him for a long moment. "Because the sky remembers everything, even those who try to escape it. You flew into a fracture between moments. Now you are part of its memory." Cade stepped forward. "Is there a way back?" The keeper's eyes softened. "There is no back. Only forward." "Forward where?" Lena asked. The keeper gestured toward the endless city beyond. "Into remembrance. Into eternity." They were free to explore the city, if freedom was the right word. The streets were lined with the remnants of 1,000 lost flights. Twisted fuselages transformed into bridges, propellers embedded into towers, cockpit windows repurposed as skylights. Everywhere, people wandered, some laughing, some crying, most simply staring into the endless horizon. None aged, none hungered, none died. "This is eternal," Marina whispered as she walked past a cafe built from the hull of a 1930s Zeppelin. Ghostly figures sipped coffee, speaking languages long forgotten. But not all was peaceful. At the city's edges, beyond the golden glow, shadows lingered, malformed shapes that howled in silence. The lost without memory, the keeper had explained. Those who refuse to let go. They wander forever, unable to accept their fate. For Captain Holt, acceptance was not an option. "This isn't peace," he said to Lena as they stood on a balcony overlooking the endless city. "This is captivity." "What choice do we have?" Lena asked. "We're dead." "Maybe," Holt said. "But maybe we're not." "Not yet." He turned to Dr. Cade. "If time converges here, if every moment overlaps, then there's a chance, however small, that we can break free." Cade frowned. "It's impossible." "Impossible," Holt repeated, "is what pilots are trained to defy." They stared out at the fleet of derelict aircraft drifting above the city, some with engines still functional, others stripped bare. Among them was a plane identical to theirs, hovering silently in the golden mist. Holt's jaw tightened. We take one. We try. It was madness. It was suicide. But as Holt, Lena, Marina, and Cade climbed aboard one of the old jetliners, they felt something they hadn't felt in what seemed like centuries. Purpose. The engines roared weakly to life. The controls responded, sluggish but functional. And as the craft lifted from the docking platform, the city below erupted in alarm. Unauthorized departure. A voice boomed across the skies. Return or be lost forever. Already lost, Holt muttered. Might as well try. The aircraft climbed higher, slicing through the layers of golden cloud. The beacon pulsed above them, impossibly far, yet somehow within reach. But the higher they climbed, the heavier the air became. The controls fought back. The engines sputtered. And below, the city's glow began to dim. Altitude failing. Lena shouted. We're not going to make it. Yes, we are. Holt growled, forcing the throttles forward. The plane shuddered violently, metal groaning under pressure. And then, for a fraction of a second, the golden light flickered. A gap opened in the fabric of the sky. A glimpse of stars. A hint of real night. We're breaking through, Cade yelled. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the gap slammed shut. The engines died. The cockpit went dark. They were falling. The city rushed back up to meet them, its towers reaching like skeletal hands. Passengers in the streets below looked up and screamed soundlessly as the ghost flight plummeted from the sky. Brace! Holt shouted, gripping the yoke with everything he had. The plane roared downward, splitting clouds and light apart. And then, with a thunderous crash, it struck the edge of a spire. Metal tore. Fire blossomed. Darkness consumed everything. When the silence returned, there was no wreckage. No bodies. No plane. Only the golden light. And the city, unchanged. There was no impact. No pain. No flames. Just silence. Captain Holt opened his eyes slowly. He was sitting in the cockpit, hands on the controls, as if nothing had happened. The soft hum of engines vibrated through the metal beneath him. The panels were alive again, blinking and glowing. Beside him, Lena was at her station, calm and steady. For a moment, Holt thought they'd made it, that they had broken free. But then he saw the clouds. They were the same golden hue, the same strange shimmer. And below them, the city still floated, eternal and unchanged. Did we crash? Lena whispered. I think so, Holt replied, his voice hollow. But we're still here. The cabin door creaked open behind them. Marina entered, her face pale but calm. Everyone's awake, she said. No one remembers the fall. It's like it never happened. Dr. Cade followed her, clutching his notebook tightly. This place isn't bound by time or physics, he murmured. Death, life, crash, flight, they're all the same here. Everything is an echo. Then why do we still feel alive? Holt asked. Because, Cade said, his voice trembling, we're not ghosts yet. It started as a whisper on the radio. A faint, static-drowned signal that none of them had heard before. Point 303, do you read? Flight 303, come in. Marina's eyes widened. That's ATC. That's real. Holt leaned forward. This is Flight 303. We read you. Repeat. We read you. T-303 disappeared off radar 9 years ago. If you can hear this. The transmission dissolved into static again, but the cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers shouted, cried, clutched at one another. For the first time since the sky swallowed them, Earth was calling. They're still looking for us, Marina said, tears streaming down her face. Or, Cade whispered, time hasn't moved the same way for them. Lena turned to Holt. What if this is our way back? Holt stared at the horizon at the faint blue line beyond the golden glow. Then we chase it. The engines roared as Flight 303 banked upward again. Holt pushed the throttles to their limits, the controls straining beneath his grip. The nose rose. Altitude climbed. The city began to shrink below them. But the higher they climbed, the stronger the resistance became. It wasn't turbulence. It was like time itself was pushing back. The golden clouds churned violently, pressing the aircraft downward. Lightning arced across the sky in brilliant, silent flashes. Altitude decreasing. Lena shouted. We're losing thrust. Keep going. Holt roared. We're breaking through. The radio crackled again, stronger this time. Flight 303. Do you copy? Coordinates: 41 degrees north, 72 degrees west. And then the cockpit lights flared white hot. 4. The door in the sky. They broke through. For a heartbeat, just a single, trembling heartbeat, they were surrounded not by gold, but by stars. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, the curve of the earth faint on the horizon. The passengers cheered. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others screamed with joy. They had done it. They had escaped. But something was wrong. The engines coughed. The instruments went dark. The horizon began to twist. Gravity's all wrong, Cade whispered. We're not in time, we're between it. Through the forward glass, Holt saw it. A jagged tear hanging in the sky, like a wound in reality itself. Beyond it, darkness, rain, and a flash of radar beacons. Earth. It was their way home. Straight through, Holt said, gripping the controls. Hold on. The plane screamed as it accelerated toward the tear. The fuselage shook violently. Alarms blared. The passengers held on to each other as the world outside warped and buckled. And then, with a sound like the universe splitting in half, Flight 303 vanished into the rift. They were falling through a storm. Rain pounded the windows. Wind roared against the fuselage. The altimeter spun wildly. They were plummeting toward the Atlantic Ocean. The cockpit was alive with panicked shouts and flashing warnings. Engines offline. Lena yelled. We're gliding. Brace for impact. Holt shouted over the roar. Below, searchlights cut through the darkness. Ships. Coast Guard. They were real. They were home. Altitude 2,000 feet. The plane shuddered, rattling as if every bolt was coming loose. Passengers screamed. Overhead compartments burst open. The ocean rushed closer, dark and merciless. Pull up, Marina cried. I'm trying. Altitude 1,000. The horizon tilted. The nose rose slightly. Too little, too late. Altitude 500. And then, a deafening explosion of water and steel. 6. Aftermath. 2 days later, the wreckage of Flight 303 was recovered off the coast of Nova Scotia. Investigators were baffled. The jetliner was largely intact, yet its systems bore signs of being dormant for decades. The strangest detail: every passenger's watch, phone, and digital clock had stopped at the same time, 3:03 a.m., and none could be restarted. Of the 187 souls aboard, only 11 survived. All of them told the same impossible story. A city in the clouds. Ghosts in the aisles. A sky that swallowed time itself. The world dismissed it as trauma. Hallucination. A coping mechanism born from tragedy. But deep in an evidence locker at the NTSB headquarters, one final piece of Flight 303's mystery remained. A final cockpit transmission, broadcast seconds before the crash. This is Captain Holt of Flight 303. We're home. Tell them, the sky remembers. High above the clouds, the golden city still floats, patient, timeless, eternal. And on one of its countless spires, a new name has been carved into the stone floor of the archive. Flight 303, returned, but not forgotten. The passengers who never made it home wander its streets now, some in peace, some still searching. Among them is Clara, hand in hand with Luca, gazing down at the blue planet far below. Do you think they'll remember us? She asks. Luca smiles faintly. The sky always does. The clouds part for a moment, revealing a contrail streaking across the horizon. Another flight, another story yet to be written. And then the city swallows the light again, waiting patiently for the next arrival.